we don't cross the line much. Armchair admirals will tell you it's because crossing with a fleet looks like you're invading Pax space. I outright war, which would be met with interstellar faster. Then light missiles, quickly spiraling out of control. Crossing the line would result in a galactic game of throwing rocks and seeing whose resolve and homeworld cracks first, but they're not quite correct. Sure, a concerted crossing, going deep into their territory, would indeed look like an invasion of all Pax space. But we in the fleet all know there are 3 lines. There's the line, the official border between us and the Pact nations, and about 10 light years in, there is another line. Across that one, and it's no longer a border incursion. It's war. Planets start getting cracked. Same thing on our side, the League of Baloth will not tolerate 10 light years. Within that, sure, they'll fight back in force if we cross and take a system, but if we can keep it, lines adjust. Now, in the early days, when the Hecatians were still rebranding as the Commonwealth, the Actonans hadn't joined the Pact, and humanity was a species triumphant in ground combat. But with barely any space-going fleet, we did cross a lot. And there would be big fights. The Hecatians did alright then. They had a spacefaring tradition, but they were using the same weapons we'd seen already for decades. Centuries, frankly. Nuclear warheads on contact detonating missiles, plasma, that type of stuff. The humans were pretty much the same at that point, except a lot worse. Because, well, you know about the whole deal with them. In the space of a few years, they went from life elsewhere in the galaxy being a hotly debated theoretical, to standing victorious over the corpse of the Hecatian Stellar Imperium through events too complex to recap here. It was astounding, and a brilliant success for them. It also left them having to work out how this space warfare at scale stuff worked, and they could only really use Hecadian designs. They tried, oh by god, they tried, but they weren't quite ready for it. Slowly they got better, and better tactically, but they were still stuck with the same designs as the Hecatians on the front line, so to speak. We saw the new custom models. They started to churn out of series and Titan, but they were all kept in reserve. Never allowed near combat, and certainly never anywhere our spies could get a look at them. But that changed real quick. It had been assumed as a fact of life that the humans would remain a minor player in space warfare until the day the 5th Fleet sent 4 of its battle groups to, well, poke the sleeping low-tips as the saying goes. The fleet commander, a wonderful admiral, friend of my mother, planned to lure out one of the best admirals the Hecadians had, and trap him. Force him to fight without his back to a planet, so we could nail him with an isfem to the face. Nice easy victory, and we'd get to keep a highly contested planet from it. They'd started preparing the press pieces about the Battle of Mitovax, as it's generously called to this day, before the fleet even departed. I was there, as bridge crew on the flagship of Battle Group C, the Indomitable. Personally, I'd say less Battle of Mitovax, more slaughter at Mitovax. Or disaster at Mitovax. Mistake at Mitovax. But that's a joke that only works in one specific human language. Perfectly timed. Though, I'll say that in favor of the plan. Battle groups A, B, and C jumped into Mitovax, 3 years orbit, and swept away its defenses without trouble. Launched a ground assault on the planet itself, partly to knock out planetary-based sensors, partly to start setting up in our new acquisition. Then a few strike formations went out and hunted for other sensors in the vicinity. With that done, Battle Group D, reinforced with a third of each other battle group, jumped in behind Mitovax 3, its tiddly locked moon. They were the trap element here. They'd hold position behind 3-bed, in sensor shadow from anything the other battle groups had missed. When the Hecatians arrived to fight a calf, something we expected to happen in about a day or two, D would come in from the flank, guide in an ISM-SM strike from their arsenal ship, and nail the Hecatian commander. Then it would be a quick and easy job to cut down what was left. Instead, Battle Group D was engaged first, less than an hour after arrival. We still don't know how the humans figured out the plan or timings. obviously they aren't willing to share, beyond publicly saying that we guessed right. Some say they're geniuses who had positioned concealed sensors perfectly years in advance. Some say they had a spy in the fleet. Others say signal intercepts, or all three. Plenty more conspiracy theories abound, and there's even one school of thought that says the whole thing was basically an accident, and the humans had just stumbled across Battle Group D not knowing what was happening. My own research and gut instinct says the humans aren't lying. They guessed right, and had laid out concealed sensors across 3, in exactly the right spots for what was coming. They jumped 60 destroyers into the middle of Battle Group D. Literally. That's skill, utterly immense skill, and dedication you couldn't find anywhere else. They'd have had to disable their anti-collision systems to prevent an early automatic deceleration, meaning that even a single mistake could have been catastrophic. But beyond that, Battle Group D had just shy of 300 ships total. That right there is where the accident theory comes from. Of course, reality is, you don't have 60 warships performing a simultaneous jump from below the galactic plane into the same spot like that by accident. But, crucially, the accident theory is funny, so I can see why it's popular. The first thing the human force did was slam the engines on at full power, accelerating out of the midst of Battle Group D. The second was to start spraying the void around them with their lasers. D, of course, weren't expecting lasers. The shields were fine-tuned to deal with plasma first and foremost. These barrages wrecked shields, caused chaos, disabled guns, and even killed a few ships. Every close-range system they had was blazing away, and it immediately disrupted everything. We in Battle Group's Air Cav had no idea, of course, because there was a moon in the way. Sorry, you had a question. Why would they accelerate out if they intentionally put themselves in our midst? Because the point was the initial chaos. Getting that close to your enemy is a serious risk. One that can pay off, but only if you're careful about it. Accelerating out meant they got the benefits with as little risk as possible. They lost ships, of course, but less than they would have if they'd stayed put in the middle. So, where was I? Oh yes, the comms and lasers. The reason we knew so little was because human frigates jumped in and cut the relay of comm satellites we'd set up. And the destroyers, they unleashed their second trick. Missiles, a thick rain of them. At that short range, shields down or wounded, and with our SOs bloodied and broken. Even regular contact detonation, nukes would have been deadly to a decent amount of ships. They didn't use regular ones. The missiles are yet another thing we still don't understand entirely. We know the theory behind them, but we don't understand what they use to make it happen. In short, they don't use nukes as their warheads. Instead, they use the nuke to propel a bit of metal at absurd velocities. A nuclear explosive formed penetrator. The theory is obvious, and we know how to put it into practice to some extent. What we don't understand is how they got it so effective. They must have some sort of ultra-resistant alloy to get flung at such high speeds, and some way of directing the nuke's energy sufficiently. The same goes for their other ace missile. They call it a Kasaba howitzer. That's the term. Much the same principle, except the bit of metal isn't flung, it's vaporized. And that's used as a plasma beam. That's right, beam. They turn nuclear weapons into a single-use, ultra-deadly particle lance. One hit can gut an unprepared destroyer in the blink of an eye. 3. A cruiser. These missiles are programmed to form a pattern around the ship's hull and fire for maximum effect. For big ships, that's one through the bridge, one from bow to stern, and one through the engine. If there's enough, they'll throw another 2 on diagonals, covering the absolute maximum possible internal volume of the doomed ship. What they really love is to use both systems in tandem at the same site, one after the other. If shields are up, the penetrator wave breaks through and makes cracks on the armor, maybe even breaks through on its own. Then, the Kasaba howitzer fires directly into that crack and melts decks away. We'd never seen either of these before, you must understand. The fleet would have been unprepared under ideal circumstances. Psi-Rs back then didn't have good enough effective range to intercept before the missiles fired. Nowadays, it's possible, but you would not want to bet on it. But then, it was damaged. Underpowered systems. It was a slaughter. The cruisers and battleships. They were hit hardest. Frankly, the humans hit way too hard. Theories on that are they had no idea how much was killed, so opted simple and went with overkill. I had a friend on one of the frigates that got destroyed. He survived only because the beam narrowly missed the reactor. He said that run to the escape pod was the longest run in his entire life. As the destroyers continued to accelerate out, they unleashed their last major trick, a swarm of mines with the same loadouts as the missiles. Mines are really useful in orbital warfare, where 99.9% of all space battles happen. You know where the enemy is going to be, and use the mines to wreak havoc or channel them as you wish. Plus, unlike missiles, they don't need that much fuel or maneuvering ability, so you can basically stack them all over your hull and let them loose as necessary. There was one last thing that was seen at this point, but as far as we can tell, it was a completely unsanctioned one. Multiple ships spanned themselves so that their drives were pointing right at our vessels. This was an extremely risky maneuver, but ship hulls tend not to work well with a fusion torch pointed right at them, not unfairly. Battle Group D had had enough at this point, and with the mines now floating around, had decided there was very little point remaining in place. Their drives had recharged, so they made a short jump to elsewhere in the system to try and get some respite and work out what the hell was going on. They looked for options and started preparing the jump in record time. You might have noticed the second part of what I said about the mines. They channeled the enemy. The humans had scattered them in a couple of long ribbons, locking off multiple angles. Combat jumps are always performed, so you have some sort of stellar object in the vicinity to prevent the enemy wiping you with IS-FMs. So, the fleet only had one option at this point, orbit of Mitovax 6. They arrived without incident and began reorganizing, recharging their shields, and generally effecting repairs. Then an entire human fleet jumped in. They had been waiting a few seconds of jump time away, which meant they were on the scene in less than a minute, accounting for signal delay and quick collision computing. What followed was an engagement, so one-sided, overwhelming numbers and technology against a mold battle group, that when the humans say they took no losses in it, no serious person attempts to dispute it. In this engagement, 5th Fleet's commander was killed. His second in command was killed, and the Trillax Naval Academy class of 2078 was wiped out to a man. Only a handful of ships survived, because their captains had been more on the ball and ordered surrender. By this point, those of us in battle groups, ACARC knew something was up. The relay satellites had gotten some warning out, and their failure to respond only further concerned its commanders. Battle Group C, the one I was in, moved to investigate. We found a huge debris field. Some human escape pods, many more League escape pods filled with confused and stunned sailors, and several League ships that had been too damaged to make the jump. We also detected the human fleet, fully regrouped, now menacingly orbiting Mitovax 6. Their destroyers had recharged their drives and had jumped off, forming one huge cohesive force. We'd lost all our in-system ISMs in the first bit of the battle, so this fight would have to be purely conventional. In accordance with doctrine, we dropped search and rescue beacons, and then returned to the rest of the force as it repositioned to face the humans. We scrounged up every bit of data we could in those minutes, started analyzing it as fast as possible, trying to come up with a plan. I've never felt so much strain on my mind as in those minutes. Let me tell you. Everything we recovered, it seared into my mind as we were rolling it over in our heads, again and again. It's testament enough to just how good we were, that by the time our drives had recharged, we'd managed to reposition and reshape the formation totally, in what we thought was the best pattern. Hell, we were even starting work on shield reach unit. Of course, now was the point that the Hecatians showed up. They smashed into our 3 battle groups, doing a worse job pound for pound than the humans had, but still wreaking havoc on us. Once more, we had to turn and adjust formation, at which point the humans jumped in behind us and closed the trap in all 3 dimensions. The whole time, as they fired, they broadcast repeated orders for us to surrender. Deafening calls. They jammed our comms between ships and blared the demands over them. I'm only talking to you because the captain of my ship defied our battle group's admiral to his face and had us surrender. Many other crews were not so fortunate. Once we were done, every ship a broken hulk or surrendered, the human Hecatan fleet turned their attention to our ground forces. Demands were repeated as troop transports began jumping in. The general in command was either too slow on the uptake or too stunned to acknowledge what had just happened and failed to surrender. His new command post was demolished with him inside by a trio of precision-guided bombs, and his successor was running up the white flag shortly thereafter, so ended the battles of Mitovax. Every League ship sent was destroyed, crippled beyond repair, or captured, the humans refusing to return the latter. We were repatriated after a month, and I can tell you they did not lay so much as a finger upon us, except to treat wounds. Though they did make clear we could defect if we wanted, the ground forces at least only suffered 64 deaths and 127 wounded, out of a brigade strength formation. The humans and Hecataeans then launched a brief counter-offensive across the line, seizing back every system we had taken in the back and forths of the past few decades. For the loss of these ships, and 76 of the crew, a highest loss rate of any non-SFM engagement in history, we had gained nothing. The human fleet was so lightly harmed. They were doing parade laps at full strength mere months later. So what had we learnt? We learnt that human destroyer crews are their best. We think of destroyers as a terrible first assignment packed with inexperienced crews who want to get off a cannon fodder ship as soon as possible. But the humans and their allies, they take pride in being destroyer crew. They consider themselves elite, best of the best, that their job is to charge in, wreak havoc, and have the other ships clear up. They're not suicidal. No, God no. They're trained. That's the kind of mindset you need to have 70 ships agree to disable their automatic collision systems and willingly thread needles through space to wind up surrounded by enemy ships. We learnt we had drastically underestimated human technology, that they had intentionally kept their best gear off the front lines for years on end to ensure they had a large enough fleet for one decisive move, that they had found an area and exploited it until they had an insurmountable technological advantage. And I mean insurmountable. It took more battles for us to even realize what the missiles were, and after that we tried to replicate it, but no dice. There's theories on how they channel it, theories on how to make the specific alloys, theories, but no further. We're so far behind on it, and the humans keep improving, that RD just decided to stop working on it. Improve known tech we already had rather than set off down a whole new path in pursuit of an enemy miles ahead. Plus, their spies are very good at hampering our research. We learned that humans value planned chaos above all else. That may sound like an oxymoron, but it's simple really. They prize chaos as a weapon, seeking to inflict it, channel it, utilize it at decisive points. That doesn't mean some sort of "all can't predict our moves if we don't know what we're doing" nonsense. It means their plans are designed to break the plans of their enemies and shatter every possible fallback option. 70 destroyers with weapons we'd never seen before, right in the middle of our fleet. That was planned chaos made manifest. I learned that human ships are strangely beautiful. Once all the mines they strap on have been ejected, you see these sleek, angular ships that exude power. They're extremely menacing to be around in normal times. Watching one unleash its missiles is awe-inspiring. the cover smoothly gliding off, missiles popping out and speeding away into the distance. They even carry their names prominently, so you know exactly which ship you're dealing with each time. Nothing quite like watching a destroyer called Un-V walk backwards into hell going toe-to-toe with a cruiser 3 times its size and winning. And we learnt, most importantly of all, don't cross the line if you value your life or your ship.